Okay, here we go. Okay, so you can read 1 Kings for yourself, and you can see the way the progression of deterioration goes, and just how that kingdom falls apart more and more, degenerates into more and more idolatry, more and more trouble. So like you see on the chart there, 9 families. The kingdom is never really firmly established. There's never any real kind of semblance of right order. It's a very selfish kind of orientation. Lots of death, lots of people getting killed. There's one story of one of Ahab's descendants. There's 60 sons, and they kill all of them at once, and they put their heads in baskets and put them outside the gates of the city to show that these guys are no longer in charge. I'm the king. So that's one thing that happens there. So, okay. Now the next major figure in terms of speaking for God, because we have these kings, and you can read that through, and you can see what happens to their lives. But Elisha is different from Elijah. And we never really have anything that's, any negative things said about Elisha. Elijah finds him after he comes out of the cave, and immediately Elisha leaves his place at his home. In fact, he takes the family plow, and he takes the family plow that has 2 oxen, and he slays the oxen, and he uses the plow to sacrifice the oxen on it. So that's a real commitment. Like, what'd you do with the lawnmower? What happened? Oh, I sold it so that I could become a prophet. I'm going to prophet school. I just want you to know that. And so Elisha followed Elijah all the way, and this is the point here. This is Elisha asks Elijah for a double portion of his blessing. And that's a great, I'm going to serve after you. I need to have, people aren't going to believe that I'm in the same spirit, so I'm going to need a double portion of your blessing. Actually, it's a term of inheritance. He said, I would like to inherit your ministry. Maybe we're not blood, but I am going to serve after this. And you can, he faithfully served with Elijah for 10 years. He stayed close like Ruth stayed to Naomi. And he modeled his leadership for others. Like in 2 Kings 2-6, we see that he creates a school of prophets. He recognizes that Elijah lived a very lonely life. Maybe, if he's serving 10 years, he and Elijah had a lot of conversations. And Elisha's saying, I'm not going to live this way. And that happens. Just like some of the pioneers, the people who start out pioneering in a certain way, they have a very different ministry than the people that follow them. And so it's not wrong, it's just different. And he had double the miracles of Elijah. Here we see Elijah's miracles, the drought, the meal and the oil multiplied for the widow, child raised, the fire that falls from heaven. And then there's captains that come after Elijah, and they're slain by fire from heaven. And then the rain falls, and then in this last time, he smacks his mantle, takes off his shawl, basically, and smacks the water, and Elisha and Elijah walk through. So there's 7 miracles that are recorded from Elijah, and you can see those there, 7 miracles. Double the miracles, there's Elisha has 14. And one happens after he dies. That's the last one. They haven't covered his bones yet, and they haven't covered his bones aren't covered up. He's in a grave, and they throw a dead man in on top of his bones, and the dead man comes back alive. So that's the 14th. That's the 14th miracle by Elisha. So he divides the Jordan. He heals the water by throwing some meal in it. The bears, there's mocking children, and he curses them in the name of the Lord, and the bears attack a crowd of kids. The kids were calling him bald head, and and Elisha cursed him in the name of the Lord, and the bears came out of the woods, and it says they tear them. It doesn't mean they tore them apart. They mauled them, but it doesn't, So anyway, let's see, the digging ditches, and there was water, these things. One of the important one, the iron that swims. The guy swung an axe, the iron threw it, and Elisha says, throw in the stick, and the axe head came and attached itself to the stick. But one of the great things, one of the great stories, and you could talk about this, is Naaman. And this is, again, God showing Israel throughout the Old Testament that your purpose on earth is not for yourselves, it's to be a blessing to the whole world. Naaman is a Syrian. He's an enemy of Israel, and he has leprosy. And during one of the wars, a little Israeli girl, a little Israelite girl is captured and serves as a household servant, household slave in Naaman's house. And Naaman has leprosy. He's a great general. They don't have the same laws of leprosy in Syria as they do in Israel. He doesn't have to go announcing he's unclean. He just says, charge and kill. But the little girl from Israel says, if my master would go to my country, he could find one of the prophets and be healed. And so the little girl is like speaking in the mission. The master goes and finds Elisha. Elisha doesn't even come out of the house. It's like Elisha serves God. And if a heathen soldier comes to ask him, he said, okay, go tell him to wash in the Jordan River 7 times, so the skin will be just like a baby. And that's it. And the guy's like angry. The guy like storms away. Well, that's not the way it works. In our religion in Syria, you come out and you do a little incantation, a little dance, throw some stuff in the air, and then bang, it happens. We've seen it happen, We've seen it happen in our temples. Naaman goes back, and like some of his assistants say to him, Master, just got a little opinion, but, all they told you to do is just go dip in the river 7 times and you'll be well. Now, if they had told you to run up the mountain or do something great, you would have done it. He's all right. So he finally comes to his senses and goes and dips 7 times in the Jordan, and he is healed. And, he comes to Elisha and he wants to make an offering for Elisha. He says, here, let me give you something for what you've done for me. And he said, Elisha says, I'm not taking anything from you. And now the interesting exchange in that part, I tell this story for this reason, because Naaman has come to a realization about who God is. Just like the widow in Sidon, when her son was brought back to life, she believes the word of the Lord. This guy's healed. He believes the word of the Lord. He has a problem, though. He's the assistant to the king in Syria. And every day, the Syrian king has to go in and serve their God, and he has to get down on his knees with the king. And Naaman asks Elisha, he said, is it possible that, in so many words, he said, is it possible that the God, your God, the God that I believe in now, would forgive me if I would bow in our temple with my king, because this is my job? And Elisha looks at him and says, go in peace. It's like, so, God looks on the heart, and if his heart is right with him, it's not going to matter if he's going into this like, well, wait a minute, he's committing adultery. And this was the problem. Naaman had a problem with this. He's recognizing that I can't worship this idol anymore. I just had an experience with the God of heaven, and this is the real God. What am I going to do about this? Because probably it means if I leave the king, I'm dead. And Elisha says to him, he says, go in peace. There's no other explanation. Naaman has a very legitimate concern. Can I go in here and kneel like this before this idol, and will God forgive me of that? And just see it as me kneeling before him. Can that happen? And Elisha says, go in peace. That's, I don't know what to do with that, but I'm sure you're going to meet people that you wonder about them and like what they do. They have to go to this kind of thing with their parents or something like that, and I'm just saying that, Elisha said to Naaman, go in peace, and it's not going to be a problem. God looks on the heart. So, it's a good story. All right. Now we wonder, about 722 BC, Assyria, like I talked about earlier, is going to take this whole group of people and move them, and does this mean that 10 tribes are gone? What happened to the 10 tribes? Not really. Hoshea will be the final king. The Assyrians will transplant these people and implant people, moving them around. This is really famous in the old Soviet Union, right? Right? The Soviet Union did that, famous for doing that. Hitler was really planning to do that. I don't know if you know that. If you read the archives of the Third Reich, their plan was to take all of the Dutch people and move them to Bulgaria. So that was one of Hitler's great plans. It's like it's just a way of control. It's like this way, if we get you out of your element, as long as you're staying in your element, you can hide in your caves, you can do like a guerrilla warfare. But if we just take all of you and just ship you off to another place where you're not familiar, there's not going to be any trouble. It worked in the former Soviet Union for, 70 years. There's people scattered all over the Soviet Union that their families, they have no roots there, and they're all over the place. So that these intermarriage, that's the thing that would happen, like when we come to the Gospels, we see these people called Samaritans. And these people were a product of this Assyrian kind of implantation. So what happened after the Assyrians removed all of the Israelites from there and implanted all these people, God sent lions in. There's a story, there's lions, and these lions started to attack people. And the king of Assyria said, you know what? There's a God in that land. And if we don't figure out how to satisfy that God, these lions are going to eat us all, eat all the people we keep putting up there. So they found a priest. They found a priest from Samaria who had served in Bethel, the sort of hybrid religion with the calf and also worshiping Yahweh, and brought that guy back, and then there was some peace in the land. But this idea of the Samaritans being this half-breed, it comes from this thing that happened here, that the deportation and the implantation of others, and people who were of the tribes of Israel intermarried, but there was still this, we go all the way down through the next 700 years until Jesus comes, and Jesus meets a woman at the well, and she's talking about what they know about worshiping God. So they know the God of Israel, the God of Yahweh. They have some other things mixed with it, of course, but the Samaritans, these Samaritans are this group of people are intermarried people that are descendant from this time period. So they're not really gone, because Revelation 7 tells us in the future that God will call 12,000 from each tribe, and they will be witnesses during the Great Tribulation. So the tribes are not gone. God knows what he's doing. God has his hand on all of it. All right, so Judah, the latter part of 2 Kings, after we see that Israel is out of the picture, the northern kingdom is out of the picture now, the rest of the book of Kings deals with this progression of the decline of this dynasty. And then the last part of 2 Kings deals with the capture of Judah. And so we had 20 kings, and we said 8 were have said to do right in the eyes of the Lord. We have Asa, Jehoshaphat, these 8 guys, they did have some measure of obedience in following God. Amaziah is maybe the craziest one. He asked God for help in a battle, and God gives him this amazing victory. And then while they're cleaning up after the battle, they find an idol, and he brings the idol home and builds an altar to the idol. So the men he won the battle over the people, over this nation by the God of heaven, and then when he sees their idol, oh, that's cool. That is really, man, that's what we need. I'm going to put that right in my living room, build a little altar to it, and this is the kind of, this hybrid kind of, there's a word for it, it's called heterodoxy. There's orthodoxy, which means you have a oneness about your belief system, and then there's heterodoxy, which I have this belief system, but I also add in something else to it. And this was a problem in the northern kingdom, and now we see that it is also a problem in the southern kingdom from time to time. And so we don't get this but with Hezekiah and Josiah. It's like I said earlier, they did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, but their hearts weren't entirely perfect with God. We don't get that with Hezekiah and Josiah, but there are a couple of incidents in their lives that show that they weren't, they were still men and given to like passions, and they could, they did some prideful things toward the end of their life that cost them too. Okay, Hezekiah is the high point. So he's the high point of the kings of Judah. Now we see some of the things that he did during the course of his reign. Now, the brazen serpent is still around. It's like, that's kind of interesting. That's from the days of Moses too, from the wanderings in the wilderness. And it had become an icon and an idol. Now, icons are religious symbols that carry mystical and miraculous powers. Okay, that's pretty much what they have. Over here on, not far from here, just over the hill, there's a church, and I grew up over the hill over here, and they brought the Black Madonna in one day. It's an iconic picture of Mary that's like in deep walnut wood, and people kiss it. It's like, so I grew up in that kind of orientation, and so one day they had this big giant ceremony. Thousands of people, come into all these church masses there, and they bring the Black Madonna. They set it up right at the base of the altar at this church, and then they had little alcohol swabs so that after the one person kissed it, they would wipe that person's germs off of it. But people would come to it's iconic. So when you hear something referred to as iconic, it doesn't mean what's on your laptop or your iPad. It means that an icon was a religious symbol that carried mystical and miraculous powers. It came from the Orthodox when the church began to split. When the church moved east over into what's now Istanbul, Constantinople, it became more Eastern oriented, and because of that trade route, the mystical kind of things that were practiced in the Middle East and in India and in China started to flow in, and this idea of iconic imagery came into the church. And so the Eastern Orthodox Church, very iconic kind of items. So mosaics, different kinds of things that carried sort of symbolism, sort of like good luck charms, that kind of thing. But Hezekiah really had like a comprehensive kind of reform in the nation. And he began to celebrate the Passover. That hadn't been celebrated in centuries. And he destroyed the idols and tore down all the high places. Now, not a lot of high places in Israel. Every hill had a shrine. Israel's not that far above sea level, but so a 2,000-foot hill could become like a shrine. Everything any high place became a place where there was an altar of some sort, not an altar, and God said there's one place, there's one worship center, not many. And so he instituted the Passover. Now the big story, this story is told 3 times in the Bible. It's told in Isaiah, it's told in Kings, it's told in Chronicles. The story of how the Assyrians, who had already taken the northern kingdom captive, had now surrounded Israel, had now surrounded Jerusalem, the city of Jerusalem, with a siege. Now you know the pattern of a siege, right? Anyone know a pattern of a siege? What is it, Daniel? Yeah. Basically just starve the city to death by cutting off any kind of activity that could go on. It takes a long time. It takes a while. The siege of Jerusalem in 70 AD by the Romans, I think that lasted like 7 years before it finally fell. Something like that. A total on and off for 7 years. At one point, I think they said there was 9,000 crucifixes surrounding Jerusalem at that time. Anyone who escaped got hung up on a cross, basically. Someone trying to sneak out of Jerusalem, the Romans would catch him, they'd nail him to a tree. and they'd face them all at Jerusalem so everyone could see what happened. So this is what was happening in Jerusalem here. The Assyrian 185,000 persons surrounding Jerusalem, not letting anything in. People are eating, dove's dung for meals, that kind of thing. And Hezekiah and Isaiah, who was the prophet at that time, says Hezekiah spread the matter before the Lord. And then an angel came and killed all of the army that day. And then the Assyrian Empire died that day. The Assyrians mocked the God of heaven. Why did God answer that prayer? Primarily, the Assyrians mocked the God of heaven, just saying, look, none of the other gods have saved these nations, and your God's not going to save you. So, I'm just going to tell you, just come on out and do it. And just surrender. Maybe we'll find enough horses to carry the people that are left alive in you. Just mocking God. And God sent an angel, slayed 185,000. And within a month, the king of Assyria was killed by his own children, and the Assyrian Empire fell apart. And that would pave the way for the Babylonian Empire. After that, the Babylonian Empire would be the one that would take Judah and Jerusalem captive. So Hezekiah had all these, had these things. He's the man that prayed for 15 extra years, and God answered that prayer too. And then one day he got a visit from a group of delegates or diplomats from Babylon. They came, and he decided to show everything. Let me show you all my good stuff, And he showed him all of his treasures, all of the things in the temple, all of the things, all of his weapons and everything, because Hezekiah, he invented some form of catapult. He invented a machine of war that helped defend Jerusalem. Something for shooting rocks, some crude form of catapult. He also Hezekiah designed a system that brought part of the river into Jerusalem so there could be some water that would flow through Jerusalem. So, two engineering kind of things that he did. But at this moment of pride in his life, he demonstrated showed these people all of his treasures, all of the treasures of Israel, and it cost him. God said your son will not reign, your son is going to be carried away captive. It's not, but he said, it's good, there's going to be peace in my day. So even though he was a great king and a lot of great things happened during his lifetime, towards the end he had this moment of pride, and it cost the nation. It didn't really cost him so much. And so there you see that's one of all the dead soldiers around there, a little painting there. Low point is Manasseh. It's kind of interesting. The most wicked king in Israel's history lasted 55 years. 55 years. Can you imagine that? 55 years. I want you to think about that. 55 years. We only allow guys to serve 8. That's like at the most, 55 years. He fanatically practiced idol worship, executed prophets for speaking to the Lord. Eventually, he himself was taken captive by the Babylonians. And this is the amazing story. We don't get it here because, remember, the Kings is written by a prophet, Jeremiah. A prophet tells the truth, but, the truth about maybe he didn't see this part. Maybe Jeremiah didn't see this part. That's why it didn't get into his writings about Manasseh. But in 2 Chronicles, we get the story of Manasseh repents, and he's restored to the kingdom. And when he comes back, his last part of his life, he tears down all the idols, and and has a few good years at the end after 50 years of being a tyrant. It said he killed much innocent blood. It said he killed much innocent blood, allowed much innocent blood to be shed in Jerusalem. And now, like you're wondering what that is, okay? One thing that could be, like we think of abortion as a modern practice. And the way it's performed now, it is a modern practice. But throughout history, particularly as it relates to girls, baby girls, there has always been this, this practice sometimes of people leaving baby girls out in the elements and letting them die. Just letting them die, shedding innocent blood. So the sin level in Jerusalem during the reign of Manasseh meant lots of promiscuity, lots of births, and lots of girls probably being left out to die. And so when you see that statement in the Bible, that's probably what it's referring to. This happened in Rome also during the days of Jesus, and then through the first couple of centuries after, during the early church. Baby girls being left out to die on the hills, unwanted babies, any unwanted baby being left out to die in the woods, in the elements and everything like that. And then also in 1700 to 1750, before John Wesley, okay? I know we heard something like about John Wesley and how he believed you could lose your salvation. He had that orientation. He believed that. He didn't believe in eternal security. But before John Wesley transformed the nation of England with his preaching, 4 out of every 5 babies died before the age of 5 in England in a 30-year period, 1720 to 1750. So, this is the same practice. Promiscuity rampant, lots of drinking, lots of illegitimate births, and babies being left out to die in the elements. So when you see that in the Bible, you can think like, what's it mean, shed much innocent blood? Well, Manasseh's reign was so idolatrous and so immoral for most of it that many babies were left to die in this innocent blood, just like the aborted babies now. Okay, now the last high king, the last good king was Josiah. Josiah, he became a king at age 8. How about that? Couldn't even drive a car yet, but 8 years before he gets his learner's permit. And he's running the kingdom. And at about a certain point in his life, maybe 12 years into his reign, he instituted repairs to the temple. And, they started repairing the temple. And while they were repairing the temple, this is the great story, they found the book of the law in the house of God. Okay? So the years of Manasseh and then his sons that followed him, apparently the word of God, there is no open vision. The people are dying. And the nation is in real trouble. The Babylonians have become the new world empire, and they are starting to take over all around, all around Israel. And they're repairing the temple. There's something in Josiah says we have to repair the temple. So when they found the word of God and they read it to him, and immediately he tore his clothes, and he broke in this, and he sent back, and it's telling the state, because the woman, the person who's speaking for God at the temple is not a man at this time. It's a woman named Huldah. It says she was in the college. She kept the wardrobes in the college. The woman who took care of the clothes for the priests was the woman who was listening to God at that point in time. That's where the nation is at that point in time. Huldah, little known female hero in the Bible. But, Josiah heard the word of God, and Huldah said, because your heart is tender, and because you have a mind to follow him, then these things will not happen in your days. And so Josiah institutes a revival. And it happens, the people, in Hezekiah's day, the king is telling us to worship, we're going to worship, and there was a lot of that, Okay, the king says we have to do the Passover. We're going to do the Passover. The king says we have to come to temple. We're going to come to temple. So there's a lot of formalism like it. There was a revival, some true worshipers, but a lot of it was like, well, we got to listen to the king, because if we don't listen to the king, he might raise our taxes, or he might take our lambs, or he might do something with us. So there is like a revival that happens, but it's not like the kind of whole nation revival where the whole nation becomes like really on fire for God. Josiah is really having a relationship with God based on the word that he's read. And then, he celebrated the Passover, he instituted those things. But when he dies, just 4 years later, Judah is about to be deported from the first wave. Judah's Judah's exile will happen in like three phases. God understands what's happening in Jerusalem, and he has a prophet there, Jeremiah, and other prophets. And in 609, 606, in 606, 597, and then 586, there will be three phases of deportations, and then the final destruction of Jerusalem that will happen during that time. And so, but Josiah is the last king that really recognizes who God is, and it's because he had the temple being cleaned and they found the word there. So there you see it, 605, the first deportation came, 597, second deportation came under this king, and then in 586, they just decided to level everything. They demolished the temple, they tore down all the walls of Jerusalem. Zedekiah, they carried him, they captured him out in the field, they brought all of his sons before him, they killed all of his sons, and then they poked his eyes out. So the last thing he saw was the execution of his sons, and then he was carried to Babylon and died there. And there's a prophecy for him that he said that you will go to Babylon, but you will not see it. And that's how the prophecy is fulfilled. But in 586, 606 or 606, 605, that first deportation, they took all the best people, all the civil servants, all the craftsmen, all the soldiers, all the best of the land, the best people, they're first deported. So there's still some people there. 597, they come in and take more people away. And then finally, they just said, enough of this. We're taking everyone who owns land. They're all going back. We're going to tear the temple back. We're going to take all of the treasures of the temple to Babylon. And that's what happened. So Judah is going, and gone at this point at the end of 2 Kings. And so here we can see where they went into captivity. Samaritans, Samaria, they went up in here. This is Nineveh. This was the capital of Assyria. So these waves going into here from the northern kingdom, and then from Jerusalem, these were brought to this place, Babylon, down here in the southern part of Iraq now. So they spread, most of these people, so they spread up in here, up into this part of Asia Minor, and then over into Media, which is, what is that? Is that Iran? That's Iran now, right? Iran, Media, and Persia down here. So this is where, that's why there's like a strong element of Jewish and Israel, understanding of Israel and Persia in this part. But that's where they took them captive. So, and Jerusalem was destroyed. Everything is flattened there. So, all right. We'll talk about, okay, here we go. Now, what do we need to know? So this will be our final part for tonight. What do we need to know about this? The unfailing government of God is in his faithfulness. We see it in his faithfulness. He raises up men to speak for him, no matter how decadent the nation becomes. A government based on the mind of men must always end in rebellion and disaster. It's like if men are not thinking with God, then there's rebellion and disaster that's going to happen. Says something. Anyway, this says something in this political season. Why do we need to know it? Man cannot govern himself because he doesn't know himself. That's basically what it's saying. That's what the Bible explains. Like when God is out of the issue, what does it say? G. Campbell Morgan says, when God is out of count, means when God is not, when no one counts on God. He says, he turns the words around. When God is out of count, then nothing adds up for man. So when God is out of the count, nothing adds up for man. So shut God out, and even democracy will become the most awful tyranny the world has seen. And God always causes some measure of light to shine in the midst of darkness. So we need to know that. We need to know that. Okay. What do we need to do? What do we need to do? We need to read Kings and Chronicles in the light of the prophets, in the light from the prophets, and always recognize that God's great and overwhelming victory is there. And then maintain a healthy vision of ourselves and of God's purpose in all things. So as we read the book, just have to recognize what God is doing with it. And then the prophets, we should read when we get to the prophets, we'll be coming back because we'll see, if you look on the back page, you see all the prophets and when they're speaking and the kind of turmoil that they're speaking into there. And then this vision of ourselves, this idea of having a healthy vision of ourselves so we can see God's purpose in everything. Okay, why do we need to do this? Because if we don't have the prophecy and we don't see the future as God sees it, then everything is dark. There's really no hope at all. But kingdoms, and next is kingdoms only prosper if their leaders hear the voice of God. This is a big statement, I think. Kingdoms only prosper if their leaders hear or hearken to the voice of God. And a loss of vision of God leads to idolatry. There's something in a man, something in everybody that desires to worship. And if it's not worshiping the God of heaven, we will find an idol to do that. Idol might be ourself, idol might be our bank account, idol might be our car, idol might be anything, idol might be a relationship. But if we lose our vision from God, there's something about us that has to worship. It's just the way that we are made. So if we lose the vision of God, then we will fall into idolatry. We can call it whatever we want. An atheist can say that he is not worshiping anything, but the truth is he's worshiping the figment of his own imagination, and the imaginations of those before him. And it is an imagination because you can't, you can't answer that question. Is there God? All right. Bottom lines. Cause of human failure was the lost sense of God. This produces a lost sense of nationality, and hopelessness deadens the conscience, and the result is the corruption of the family. So these are 4 things that happen as a result. So corruption of a family is a real sign that God isn't really speaking in the minds of the leaders, in the hearts of the leaders. So there's a hopelessness there, a deadness there. And so when you're talking about one worldism and everything like that, the lost sense of nationality is because of a lost sense of God. God made everyone unique. Our lost sense of our uniqueness and thinking that we bring everyone together is just taking us all the way back to the Tower of Babel. So captivity to the world. That's the way Israel wound up, being tied up and marched into, and that's actually kind, because usually they didn't have any clothes on. Usually didn't have any clothes on. So I'm sorry. He's telling me to go back. So, all right. And so the last, we'll go back to that in a second. Last point is here's some vital verses, and these are the verses that we should keep in mind. Just where there is no vision, the people perish. Proverbs 29:18. That's an important thing for us to remember. Isaiah 42. Jesus will come, and he will not fail nor be discouraged. His purpose will be accomplished. He will never fail nor be discouraged. Lamentations 2:9 says, Israel's prophets find no vision from Yahweh. That's their real problem. But the other side of that is that the Lord does not faint, neither is he weary. So these verses are the verses that we should keep in mind as we read these things. We understand this is history. It's important for us to understand what happened here, the mistakes that were made, the choices that were made that led people away from God, and just how much it led to something like this. Like that, maybe we're not all like that, but you can see it looks like a bunch of lemmings marching to the sea, racing to oblivion. You know what lemmings are? You know what they are? Okay. I mean, these people followed something, and this is what happened. I think we said it last week. If you worship the God of the nation, then eventually you get the government of the nation. So if we worship idols, we will be governed by the cosmic system that's related to those idols. So the cosmic system related to these idols led these people into this captivity, and that's where they wound up. Okay? Could we end up, we'll go back to this one. Let's go back to that one. There you go. The Lord does not faint, neither is he weary. Because we won't want to leave you with like bad news to go out of here with. We want to leave you with something amazing to understand that God's hand is in all this. And we understand who we are. We understand our place in the process and the purpose of God. But he doesn't faint, and neither is he weary. He's still in control of all of this, and his purpose will play itself out according to his design. All right? As it did in the nation of Israel. Here. All right, Lord, we just thank you for being with us this evening, for your covering on our minds and hearts, our lives. Protect us as we go tonight. Cover us, Lord. We thank you for your blessing. In your name, amen.